Hello and welcome. My name is Nathan Furr. I'm a professor at INSEAD, and I want to talk to you about the 5 myths of digital transformation and what it means for your startup or your company. I study innovation. How do companies come up with ideas? How do they test their ideas? How do they win support for their ideas? I've gotten to interview fascinating innovators like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, and I'll try to bring some insights from that into our discussion. But I also study digital transformation. What does it mean, and how do we navigate the technologies in our emerging world? What I find is that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what digital transformation means, especially for established companies or smaller businesses. And it can feel sometimes when you hear everybody talking about it, is digital transformation really a real thing or is it just a fad? And let me suggest you, I think digital transformation is here to stay, even if we call it by different names in the future, because it's built on the back of this exponential growth in computing power. So that today we make more progress in 1 hour in terms of increasing our computing power than we did in the first 80 years. And the real question of digital transformation is what opportunities are enabled by these shifts? So I would say digital transformation in many ways we could think of it as what are the changes that have occurred in computing, for example. Now we've had computing for a long time, but what's different is that the computers are not only on your desk, they're also in your pocket. So if you have the iPhone, X, the iPhone 10, you have a computer that is more powerful than the first supercomputer, Cray supercomputer. They're on your wrist, they're in your devices, it's in the cloud. What's possible when you have computing power like that everywhere and when it's more powerful and cheaper than ever? But it's also about software. Now, again, we've had software for a long time, but software is changing the world in some important ways. So for example, it's become very common to have what we call APIs or application program interfaces. These are simply rules for software and data bases to communicate with each other and connect. And as it becomes easier to connect with other pieces of software, we can do more than we could in the past. In addition, software is enabling greater modularity. So that is breaking complex things down into pieces, which makes them easier to interact. And it's also enabling virtualization, or where once you needed a specialized piece of hardware, now you can have a general piece of hardware and you can use software to mimic the functionality of that special piece of hardware. It's also about connectivity. We don't appreciate how much we are connected in our contemporary world compared to 20 years ago when, only, half of people had cell phones in a city like Boston, and they certainly didn't have data on those cell phones. Suddenly we are connected via 4G, 5G, 6G networks, and those networks allow us to transfer data. And then lastly, it's about all the data that is being generated, both by physical sensors, but also by digital sensors. So every action you take on a website being recorded and captured. What becomes possible? What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. You've all heard about ride-sharing startups like Grab, Uber, Didi. Well, you probably wish you had created one of those businesses. You'd certainly be very wealthy today. But you actually could have created that business 30 years ago. I mean, ride sharing isn't that big of a deal, right? All you would have to do is get a list of your friends, then post up your phone number around town. Then when somebody arrived at, say, the airport or the train station, they would call your phone number and you would suddenly have to do matching. You would have to call through your list of friends one by one. It might get a little tedious as you get to friend number 5 and they're still not available. And eventually, though, you do get somebody who's available. But then the question is, well, how do they meet up with your customer who's waiting at the train station? How do they complete the payment? Oh my gosh, suddenly you see why you wouldn't have created that business 30 years ago. But when you have a supercomputer in your pocket with GPS enabled location and a digital platform that can match not just friends to a rider one by one, but can match it at grand scale. suddenly that business becomes possible. So it's about what are the sets of opportunities enabled by these shifts. And for that reason, that's really why digital transformation is here to stay and why we'll continue to talk about it. Because as computing power increases and connectivity and the amount of data we're generating, more opportunities are revealing themselves. So I do see a lot of mistakes being made in the thinking and action around digital transformation. So one of the things I do, I did my PhD at Stanford, and now I'm a professor at INSEAD, and I study digital transformation. And I've seen a lot of companies go through this, small and large, and I'll say, what are the mistakes? Well, one of the mistakes I see out there is equating digital transformation with grand scale disruption, like the way that the PC manufacturers disrupted the mini computer, the main, the workstation computer manufacturers, like this kind of tidal wave of disruption that's just going to wipe you away. And it can be frightening when you hear about the power of Google and Amazon and Facebook and all these companies. And the bad news I have for you is that you are not going to become Google or Facebook. So that's maybe good news though, because you can stop stressing about it. Because what I find is that digital transformation means something different for most companies. And I think it's best illustrated by two cases I want to share with you, two examples. And what I'll say is they're more archetypal examples in the sense that I'm going to talk about a specific company, but there are many other companies like them. So the first archetype I want to share with you is MasterCard. Many of you may have used MasterCard in the past, and lo and behold, we're partnering with MasterCard, but I wrote this independently of MasterCard. But MasterCard's interesting because in the past, they used to be about essentially a payments company, a credit card company. They connected customers who wanted to make payments with merchants who wanted to take payments. And that's a platform, meaning connecting two different groups of people. But recently, the CEO had this really kind of brilliant observation, which is, hey, we're spending so much money to compete with the other card companies, but only 15% of global payments are made with cards. The other, 85% are made with cash. So why are we competing for this tiny slice of the pie? Let's compete for this huge pie. Fascinating strategic insight, but what does it mean? And so MasterCard set up an innovation lab and began to experiment, and they began to explore new opportunities available to them in a digital world. And what they discovered is that as they competed with cash and they started to replace cash, it wasn't just about the payment itself. It was also about the data that was generated. So a cash payment's invisible, but a card payment is visible. And it's what could we do with that data? For example, they partnered with Transport for London and Cubic Systems, the maker of the turnstiles, to create a new system to travel on the tube. So in the past, you had to stand in line, buy an Oyster card, put money on the Oyster card, then you would tap your Oyster card when you went into the tube. That was kind of a long process, especially if you got through behind a big group of tourists. What they did with MasterCard was create essentially a contact payment system where all you got to do is tap your card on the turnstile and you can instantly walk into the tube. Now that saved Transport for London £100 million annually. Wow, that's incredible, right? And now you start to see these all over the world, say in New York City and so forth. But that was really pretty revolutionary when they first introduced it. But they started to realize something else. MasterCard started to realize, oh my gosh, once we have all that data, we actually have a portrait of how people are moving on the tube. And if that were combined with other data sources, we would actually be able to maybe change how people move on the tube. So rather than buying your coffee before, what if you got offered a discount for your coffee afterwards when and we helped you avoid the rush hour. And what they realized is if they could help people avoid peak periods, for every 1% shift in peak demand, they could save Transport for London 10 million pounds in capital expenditures alone, not to mention the inconvenience for the people traveling. So they start to realize, oh my gosh, data has a lot of power, and data infrastructure could be an opportunity for us. Now, that wasn't the only opportunity they thought they might discover. So for example, what if we separated the plastic from the ID? What could we do with digital IDs? What about that whole idea of a platform? How could we take the idea of a platform and move that into other situations? So rather than just being about connecting cards and merchants, what if we created platforms that, for example, created reliability and transparency about supply chains and where goods came from and where they were going? Or what if we created platforms that would connect, say, smallhold farmers in Africa who struggle to sell their goods at a fair price? What if we could aggregate all those farmers together so that they could service a big purchaser via a platform technology we already have? So the whole point of the MasterCard case is this, that it's an archetype of realizing that digital transformation opens up all these new business opportunities for them, which were not available in the past. And so I would encourage you to think about, what are the new opportunities that digital transformation may be opening up for my business? And I encourage you to think long and hard about that, because there might be some surprising things, no matter how small your business. In addition, though, I want to emphasize that the MasterCard archetype isn't the only archetype of digital transformation. So if you'll allow me, I want to share one more case with you, and this is the example of Aeroflot. And Aeroflot is an airline, and I'll use them as an example, but once again, they're an archetype of many other companies I've seen. So the situation at 2009 at Aeroflot was pretty bad. They were a state-owned airline, so very bureaucratic, in a very competitive industry with low margins. They had this horrible reputation as the airline to avoid. I mean, I have students who have told me about riding on an Aeroflot plane, getting on, buckling up, taking off, and having all the seats fall over because they hadn't been buckled in properly. I mean, really bad reputation. And by the way, they were nearly bankrupt. They had 2 weeks of cash flow left. So they're in this crisis situation. They bring in this new CEO. Yay, exciting. But the CEO has no airline experience. I mean, he has lots of telecom and IT experience, but no airline experience. And his first big move is to change the uniforms. And you're maybe kind of on the edge of your seat a little bit at that point, like, we got 2 weeks of cash left. I'm not sure we should be worrying about the uniforms. Now, to be fair to the CEO, he did a lot more than that. And if we fast forward to, kind of just before the pandemic, they have gone from being a truly awful airline to actually being quite a good airline with a high net promoter score, receiving awards from the industry, and they went from losing money consistently to making a profit consistently. And they increased their passenger volume, they increased the number of flights they were doing. They did all these incredible things. And when we asked the CEO, how did you go from being such a bad airline to actually one of the better airlines, he credited it as a digital transformation. You might say, well, wait a minute. In the MasterCard case, it was all about doing new things. Aeroflot isn't doing anything new. They're just flying people from Paris to Moscow as they have always done. And so what did the digital transformation look like? Well, it looked like, to be honest with you, taking the tasks they already did and doing them better with digital tools. So for example, pilots used to have a bag full of paper and forms they had to fill out, and then they would have to hand off the forms and process all those forms. Now they just take they have an electronic flight bag. So they fill out all the forms electronically, and those are submitted and processed electronically. The crew has a tablet that helps them understand who the passengers are, what do they want to be called. If they're late for connection, how could they get to where they want to end up going? The call center has one of the first Nuance intelligence voice platforms. Nuance is a company that Microsoft bought fairly recently, and they essentially allows them to automate the answering of calls and to reduce wait times to 30 seconds. And then they have the manager's monitor, which is because they have now all their planes and crews connected via sensors, they can instantly generate 427 real-time key indicators about how the business is doing. And now another CEO was kind of talking to the Aeroflot CEO and saying, oh, I have the same thing. And the Aeroflot CEO said, oh, well, how long does it take you to gather your dashboard of key indicators? And this other CEO admitted it takes 80 people a week. By contrast, the Aeroflot dashboard is being populated automatically. Nobody has to do anything to do that. And so what you see is that they're doing the same things they were doing, but doing them better using digital tools. So as we reflect on what these two archetypes mean, I want to emphasize for you that in your business, digital transformation should look like the Aeroflot case, where you are still serving your existing customers, you're still running your business, but you're doing the things you already do, but doing them differently using digital tools. You're transforming your core with digital. But also, like the MasterCard case, don't forget, it means you can also now do different things. That means you can discover new opportunities. And so digital transformation for companies is really about those two fundamental things. Now, so reality, the takeaway I want you to remember is digital transformation is not about trying to become Google or Facebook. Worry less about the kind of massive digital tsunami that will disrupt you, and ask more about how do I serve customers better, my core, use my core to serve customers better using digital tools, and how do I capture the new opportunities that are available to me. Okay, mistake number 2 is thinking that digital transformation is an event, that you're going to like do it between January and March and then you're done. It's really a journey. And usually it begins with some sort of vision about, hey, we could use digital to do things in new ways. But the problem I see, one of the mistakes I see is if you just leave it at the vision, then people get confused and they're not sure what to do. In fact, I would argue that for some of you, as I've talked about MasterCard and Aeroflot, you yourself might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed, like, whoa, those companies are not like me. I don't know how I get started. And guess what? The people you lead feel the exact same way. So you've got to give them something to get started with. So what I like to say is you want to pair the vision with some vectors of search, or think about them as pastures of activity. Where would I get started? And these vectors are short-term, they're changeable, they're valuable, and they're doable. In fact, they might look pretty simple. Let me give you some example vectors of search from companies that I've worked with. So, they're getting started. One company had a manual process to onboard customers, and they said if we could just create a digital process to onboard customers, that would be a huge deal for us. Another company, a big telecom, they sold all of their SIM cards via physical stores, and they asked the question, could we create a digital process, say for people who are flying to the country, going to step off the plane and wanted to sign up online? Yet another company had a lot of regulatory and compliance, and they asked, how could we use some software tools to help us to do that compliance process? What I want to emphasize is that these are not complex, challenging things to do, and that the vectors of search should be really easy, near-term things to do. Another way to say it, instead of the word vector, if you don't like that, is think of it like a step on a staircase. Your vision is that digital nirvana at the top of the stairs, but to get started, you have to put the first step on the stair. And so I would really challenge you to think about what is something near term, valuable, doable that we could actually use, because that's actually how people get started on the digital transformation. They just find something really simple and really valuable. They prove that it works, and then they build their confidence over time. Now, I'll just maybe, for those of you who want a little bit more sophistication, argue that digital transformation, that first step, could mean a lot of different things depending on your goals. So for some of you, it might be more digital marketing. How do we get started on that? Some of you, it might be, how do we modernize some of our IT tools? For some of you, it might be, how do we digitize processes? And yet others of you, it might be, how do we create new businesses? And that first step will look a little different based on which of these goals you're going for. This is from an article called The Four Faces of Digital Transformation that I've worked on. But the point is simply to say, choose a first step on the staircase that makes sense for you. So takeaway, reality is digital transformation is not an event, it's a journey. And you want to make sure you've got a vision, but also you've got some vectors of search. There's a first step on the staircase for people to get started. All right, mistake number 3 is focusing only on digital products. So a lot of times when people hear about digital transformation, their reaction is, oh my gosh, we've got to create an app, or we got to have some digital products. And that may be true, but there's an important tectonic shift that's happened that I want to make you aware of. And that is this shift from a world largely dominated by products to a world dominated by products and platforms. Now, when I say a platform, what is a platform? A platform is something that facilitates the interaction of users or devices or a network. So it's a piece of hardware or software that sits between the users and it facilitates interaction. So I drew all these like little arrows to help you remember with PowerPoint magic that it's about what the platform's doing is interaction. It's not doing the actual task itself, it's making connections. So for example, lots of platforms out there that you may have seen that consumers use. Uber connects riders and drivers. Airbnb connects tourists with people who want to rent their apartment. Snapchat connects teenagers who want to send messages that disappear. But again, what the platform's doing is it's just facilitating the connection. And by the way, there are B2B platforms. So for example, GE Predix trying to connect smart factories. Why do we care about platforms? Well, platforms, essentially, what's happened is that digital has allowed platforms to play a greater role in our world. So you see platforms everywhere, you can essentially put a platform on your phone, or you can use the internet. So it's kind of made platforms easier to create, and it's increased their power. So we talk about platforms because they can sometimes benefit, not always, sometimes benefit from network effects. That is, this platform gets more valuable the more people that are on it. So think about Uber. What makes Uber hard to imitate is not the app. The app is easy to create. What makes it hard to imitate is that all the riders and drivers are already on Uber or Didi, or it depends where you are, Grab. And so it's hard to displace a platform once it's in place. In addition, the platform has a lot of data, and they can learn from using that data. And the platform has a lot of control, so it can choose who gets to play and who doesn't get to play. And in fact, often these networks effects can result in winner take all. So it's why, for example, in any given geography, you'll have one or two ride-sharing platforms, so Lyft and Uber, or you'll have one or two search engines, but you won't have 15 because of these learning cycles and network effects. In fact, 60 of the world's largest 100 companies earn most of their revenues from platforms. So I'm not here to say that everybody should create a platform, because I want to warn you that platforms are hard to create and they're expensive to create. Now, if there is a platform opportunity in your industry, it might be worth doing that. And I would encourage you to do some more research on that. But the bigger question is to say, if we think about digital transformation, we want to ask not just what's my product strategy, but what's my platform strategy, either to partner with platforms or do an end run around the platforms or create my own platform. So it's just being aware of that. And platforms can be valuable tools for many smaller organizations. You just don't want to put yourself in a position where they have all the power and all the data. Mistake number 4, I would say, is trying to transform by yourself, trying to do everything by yourself. Because the second big tectonic shift that's happened in a digital world is this shift from firms to ecosystems. As digital brings down the barriers to create, connect, and interact, products are coming together, industries are coming together, and it's easier than ever to collaborate with an ecosystem to create or capture value. By ecosystem, I mean, what are all the bits and pieces that are needed for an end user to create value? And digital tends to open up the ability to collaborate and connect. So really, I would encourage you to say, well, if I'm thinking about a new opportunity, should I do it by myself or should I do it in collaboration with others? And we're seeing lots of examples of this. So one example would be Samsung partnering with Nestle and IMEX Sensors and about 20 other university startups, university projects and startups to create a device they're calling the voice of the body that would take all your data and crunch it and tell you what's really going on inside your body. Or we see ecosystems happen even within digital transformation. So rather than having a mega system, I wrote this article with some colleagues about how firms are finding it better to use an ecosystem of digital tools and kind of bring together an ecosystem of best-in-class digital tools. So even in your own digital transformation, you might want to think about an ecosystem. And it's really about who do you partner with and how do you partner with them. And if you're interested in some resources on that, I would point you to some articles I've written as well as some books by some of my colleagues. But it's just about saying, hey, do I have to do it myself or could I partner with others to do it? So the reality is, in a digital world, how can you work with an ecosystem to create and capture value? Mistake number 5, last mistake, is overlooking new business models available to you in a digital world. So the third tectonic shift, I would say, is a shift from your business model as it's always been to what I would call a digital business model. Which all that really means is realizing digital creates all this flexibility for your business model. So you can change activities. You can remove intermediaries or layers of activities. You can shift away from an asset sale, which is business model, which is I sell you something once, to subscription and service and freemium. You can focus on different aspects of the business model. So how do we focus on the lifetime customer value? We see shifts from getting revenue from physical things only to getting revenue from digital, to creating hybrid business models of, say, we were always B2B and now we could sell B2C as well, or we were always making money on products, but now we could also have a platform, and even changes in the way we think about accounting and allocation from, say, focusing only on like quarterly profits to saying, how do we focus on things like lifetime customer value? For most of you, I would say it's really about looking at what does digital allow me to do today. So for many businesses, particularly smaller businesses, you have sold through one channel. Now you can sell through multiple channels. Or you could ask, how could I use a digital tool to help me do things differently? So for example, in the past, you might have, say, waited for customers to come into your store and then they give you money and you sell them a product that you've already paid a supplier for. And so there's this kind of cash cycle where you're really having to float a lot of the cash. Could you use a digital platform to take orders in advance? You get the cash first, and then you pay your suppliers so that you actually create a cash cycle that benefits you. That's the kind of, just think creatively about the opportunities for yourself. So I would say reinvent your business model. Are you innovating based on the new opportunities available to you in a digital world? Well, I couldn't resist. I wanted to give you one more bonus, thought before I let you go, and that is, we've been talking a lot about kind of the strategy of digital transformation, a very 10,000 meter view of what do you do. And I would just remind you, if you think about going through digital transformation, remember any transformation, even though we may be talking about technology, also involves change. And people are often afraid of change. And so I would encourage you to think about the 100-meter or organizational view. How do we need to help people through this change? And then lastly, I would encourage you to think about what I call the 1-meter view, which is the innovation process view, which is anything you're doing with digital transformation is probably new. And rather than trying to plan your way to success, how can you design experiments that allow you to experiment your way to success, test, learn, and iterate? That will be much more effective. In closing, I want to thank you so much and remind you digital transformation is really about the opportunities available to you in a digital world. I would encourage you to remember it's about transforming your core as well as seeing new opportunities, to pay attention to the role of platforms, ecosystems, and digital business models. And I want to thank you. And of course, you can always look me up on LinkedIn or send me an email if you have any questions. And a couple of the things I've written that could be references to you, I'm happy to share and help if it's useful to you. Thank you. Take care. Great to spend time with you.